Welcome, you're on the Fringe Show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe is about our future of science, technology, art, economy, and society. I help you to navigate the rapidly changing world so that you can take advantage of the opportunities and make better decisions in this uncertain future. About a week ago, I took part in Create Summit run out of California as co-founder of Vernissage, a digital art gallery and the community-first Web3 project. And I decided to put together a show about the issues that we discussed. As I was part of the panel that was called Can Art Actually Heal? So the healing power of art. And we looked at different levels of healing through art at person, community, and business. So I'm sharing a couple of thoughts. I put them together, and it draws on some famous examples, but also brain research and mental health research, and so on. The usual disclaimer before we go further, that the views are my own. They do not represent the official views of any organizations or employees that I'm associated with. The Fringe Show is for educational purposes only. And I'll start with one famous artist, Pierre-Henri Matisse, or rather with the sketches of a couple of famous artists. One is Pierre-Henri Matisse, the son of Henri Matisse and the Second World War survivor. And he was famous for saying that every artist who exhibits in public voluntarily or involuntarily participates in art therapy. And artwork, he said, is like an arm that's trying to establish an emotional contact, and you as a viewer can respond to it. Art is freedom territory. It doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't know rules and restrictions. It's a place where one can realize probably the most daring and impossible dreams. The creative process itself allows you to believe in yourself, get to know yourself better, and harmonize your relationship with the universe, making it more trusting and positive. And another famous artist, American artist, is Mark Rothko. If you look at his paintings from his very early career stage, it's mostly realistic paintings, but the more and more his paintings got mature, they became more and more symbolic. And he then at the end of his career, he moved into abstract expressionist. So his imagery in the 40s, he was also very much influenced by what happened in the Second World War and this social climate of anxiety that dominated the late 30s, and images of everyday life, even though they were not really realistic, they were more surrealistic at the time. But even then, they became to appear somewhat outmoded. And if art, he believed, were to express the tragedy of the human conditions, then new subjects and a new idiom had to be found. And towards the end of the decade, of the 40s decade, he painted canvases with regions of pure color, which he further abstracted into rectangular color forms, the idiom that he would use for the rest of his life. So he found his kind of idiom, rectangular color form. In the late 40s, he was also part, together with some other young New York painters, part of a movement that was known as abstract expressionists. They worked on a variety of styles, but generally shared a commitment to creating really large-scale public works, sometimes abstract works. They shared an interest in Jungian psychoanalysis of the collective and consciousness in particular, and also believed that expressiveness was achieved in part through the physical process of painting. He's got many famous paintings, and he was also a very commercially successful artist. But there is one in particular that's very well known for its power. It's called White Center. It's a 1950 painting, and it's now in the private collection. And it is a pure rectangular color form. It has all sorts of colors, not many, but orange, pink, and black, and of course white. It's called the White Center. You can see that you really can see in this picture fire and blood and love, and it provokes very strong emotional reactions in physical life. People who were near this painting in physical life, they said it's emanating an astonishing amount of energy. And that's probably because that was the energy, the love, this creative process that he put into going about this painting. So Mark Rothko. Art can heal you and your community. That was one of the topics of our panel. And I gave an example of embroidery. Well, it's an art that anybody can engage in, and yet it has amazing healing qualities. Louise Pestel was an embroiderer of Anglo-German descent, and she was the first to note the healing quality of embroidery. That was in particular during the First World War. At first, she just wanted to distract handicapped war veterans from sad thoughts and physical pain. Many of them were post-traumatic stress syndrome victims, so they're trauma victims. She would bring hoops to the hospital and ask the veterans, all men, to do a couple of stitches. And of course, at the beginning, all these veterans thought she was making a joke of them because it was such a female thing. But there were a couple of brave ones who decided to try it out, to experiment. And as it turned out, embroidery is a brilliant method to calm shaking hands and restore fine motor functions. Hospital doctors started to refer that as almost like a tactile antidote. Veterans who were accustomed to the smell of blood, gunpowder, and wearing rough clothes and boots, and all of a sudden they started to feel silk threads and silver needles and soft fabrics, and this by itself was very helpful in overcoming all these dreadful memories. And in addition, to heal that way, you don't need to craft masterpieces. All you have to do is maybe make a couple of stitches a day, and it's already progress. Progress is the synonym of development, of growth. This is an instant miracle, which is enough to lift your spirit. And another example is that of community healing with arpileras. Arpileras is an example of subversive art in an authoritarian context as well. During the bloody dictatorship of Pinochet in Chile during the years of around 1973 to 1990, and these were the times of strict censorship, violence, lawlessness, Chilean women created a special type of embroidery, arpilezas, or folk tapestry. Unable to express their feelings in any other way, mothers and wives were silently shouting about their kidnapped daughters and sons and husbands, how they were trying to find them, and yet they were faced with despair from not knowing what's happening with them. They were shouting about their loneliness. Arpilera, by the way, means burlap. These tapestries were created using old fabrics, used fabrics, decorated with embroidery and scraps of fabrics, which could have been a piece of clothing from the deceased husband or son, or a hair lock that somehow survived. The healing power of embroidery is the ability to express what can't be done in words. And sometimes it's pain, sometimes it's happiness, it can be consolation, it can be honoring of the dead, or even a way of protest, as we've seen with this type of embroidery. Okay, so in what way does art heal? What do we know about art and healing? Firstly, art releases your emotions. It can be pain, loss, or loneliness when one is lost for words, and there is still a need to reflect on the feelings. Expressive writing is one of the ways of achieving this. Secondly, art can stabilize your emotions and moods. Carl Jung, the father of psychoanalysis, used mandala drawings in difficult times to reflect on his daily activities. Mandala drawings, I'm sure you've seen them, are intricate geometric compositions created on the basis of a circle, which is a mandala. It's very widely used in trauma research and trauma healing, PTSD, where you fill the circle with various geometric shapes to show your feelings and emotions related to the trauma. Art can also help in adjusting to serious illness and alleviate symptoms. There is a study that was done by the British Centre for Cancer Research, and art therapy is definitely very favorable for cancer patients because it increases confidence, self-esteem, and allows one to step away mentally, at least, from the disease for a short period of time. Interestingly enough, this kind of therapy, mindful-based art therapy, is very useful for healing various conditions, serious conditions, cancer, heart disease, anxiety, and it even exceeds the cognitive behavioral treatment theories as therapies that are more common in that type of healing art therapy. Then art improves cognitive functions. There are multiple experiments the world over that suggest that you can get better focus, spatial orientation, and social skills as a result of art therapy. And that's particularly true for dementia patients, which is dementia is unfortunately a very common disease these days and is on the rise. Visual art, in particular, activates different parts of the brain. This is what research has noted. That's very different from those related to your logical, linear thinking, and particularly visual areas. Art improves quality of life. Art therapy helps you to restore inner balance, slow down, and feel inspired in those moments where you feel exhausted energetically. And finally, art creates a unique cognitive shift into a holistic state of mind, which is called flow, which is very well known to artists. This is a state of optimal engagement and performance. It is mentally very pleasurable and neurochemically rewarding. And do you know that experiencing art is like falling in love? It's exactly the same chemical process in your brain. This is what Professor of Neurobiology, a British professor, Samir Zaki research showed. Viewing and contemplating artwork is akin to falling in love. Being around a person that you love and looking at a piece of art seems to activate the same brain areas, resulting in this dopamine rush that gives you contentment and positive emotions. And the most powerful influence, perhaps you would be interested to know what kind of paintings trigger this, what kind of visual art. Well, it's Renaissance paintings like Leonardo da Vinci, Sandro Botticelli, and some impressionists like Claude Monet, for example. There's been cutting-edge research that supports art's effect on mental health. And the field of study that I'm talking about is called Neuro Aesthetics, the scientific study of the neurological basis of the arts. Many different cultures, as we know, have embraced this idea that creative expression can make a powerful contribution to the healing process. Throughout history, people have used pictures, stories, dances, and chants as healing rituals. Neuroaesthetics uses brain imaging, brainwave technology, and biofeedback to run experiments on how people respond to art. There was a relatively recent experiment in 2016 when they exposed healthy adults to art, very short session, 45 minutes only, art making, any type of art. And then they provided their saliva samples to assess cortisol levels before and after the session. Saliva, by the way, is a very non-invasive biomarker. It's used very widely in experiments, and it measures changes in stress responses in patients. Art making results in that particular experiment results in significant lowering of cortisol levels. And cortisol is, of course, a mark of stress, a proxy measure for stress. Then they also asked participants to write responses as what they thought about this art making session. They found it relaxing, enjoyable, helpful for learning about new aspects of self, freeing from constraints, and allowing themselves to fall into the flow, losing themselves in the work. And I would like to maybe finish with a couple of tips on how you can incorporate art therapy in your daily routines. It's actually very easy. And these 3 tips for art-based mindfulness are thanks to Brittany Harker-Martin, art professor of the University of Calgary. Firstly, make mistakes. Try something new and be willing to make mistakes to learn. Most artists practice for years before they're able to produce something realistic, and they're willing to make mistakes along the way. And this is likely because our brains actually reward learning. Reuse and repeat, play and experiment with reusable materials. It can be dry erase markers on windows that can be easily wiped away, or sculpting material that can be squished and reshaped. This emphasizes practice and process over product. So you are detached from the product, you don't care about the result. So the pressure is off to make something that looks good. If you really must make a copy, then must keep a copy, then take a quick picture of the work and then let it go. It's very, very important to let it go. Limit language. Try not to talk to yourself or just to anyone when you're making art. And if you're listening to music, then pick music that has no lyrics. The part of the brain that are activated during visual art are different than those that are activated by speech generation and language processing. So it's totally different part of the brain, which you don't probably train as much, and you can on a daily basis. So get those overworked part of your brains a break, and the neurochemicals that are released feeling really good. It's your brain saying thank you for all this experience. And as a parting thought, yes, art heals. And I'm curious to see whether digital art, because I'm interested in digital art, has the same effect on the viewer as, for example, Mark Rothko's colorful rectangles do on the viewer. Well, thank you for joining me. It's all for now, and I will be with you in a week's time on Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. Thanks again for joining.